MidLIFE Matters, where we celebrate women's wisdom and wit. I'm Georgian Lussier, your host, and I'm delighted to introduce today's guest, Lisa Doherty, a global advocate for education who most recently was the principal of a women's college in Rwanda. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to learn a lot through all of this. I'm sure our viewers are so interested in how you got to in that whole field and place in the world. But let's start with the last 4 years. You directed the curriculum, leadership development of the faculty.
It's Aquila Institute, and it's in Kigali, Rwanda.
So a little bit of the history of the college and what that whole setting was.
Started by a young American, Elizabeth Hughes, and her husband. And they started with 50 students. That was in 2010. So now the past year, we just had 1,000 students at the school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of growth. Started with an idea to build women's leadership in the country. Rwanda's pretty forward-thinking. They have over 50% women in parliament. That's a mandate. So it's a really great place to develop women as leaders.
Women students were really making some big cultural shifts individually. So while there's a commitment to having women in these leadership roles, I'm guessing, and as we discussed, things lag. It doesn't all instant pudding happen.
Yes, exactly. For example, a lot of women aren't really expected to speak in public, at town meetings. So we had a huge public speaking section of the curriculum. They're not used to being called on in class. So you really have to work in that area. Also not expected to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
There's still preference for some male family members to go instead of female family members. And they also, don't really see themselves kind of getting a bachelor's degree or going into supervisory roles. So it was really interesting to offer kind of an associate's degree, which is what we had. And then once they got that, then the majority of our students, I'm going to get my bachelor's now. So it was a transformative educational experience, I would say, for many students. Also, there was a big character shift with a lot of students. I remember one student told me when she went home, her family had said to her, "We don't even know who you are anymore. We don't recognize you," because she was so confident. She was stating her opinion. It was a big shift for her.
And I imagine that would be a difficult journey for a young woman because you're leaving some things behind, maybe your cherished family, and taking on what seems like a new persona in many ways. This is who I am now. And I imagine it can be isolating. You have your fellow students, perhaps, and, peer support. But that takes, I imagine, a fair amount of courage.
Yes. And that was really one of the most enjoyable aspects, is meeting all of these women who, 50% of them came from very rural areas. And moving to Kigali, the capital, which is very small, was like moving to a different country for them. They didn't know anyone. That was a huge step for them. One of the great things about all-female education is they received a lot of support from their classmates. That really helped them a lot. And I remember this one student, Maria, she was on the debate team, and she had said how she used to get criticized before for kind of pushing for what she wanted, and she was called foreign, and American at times, as a negative kind of connotation, that she wasn't being humble enough and she was kind of pushing for what she wanted. And then she gets to this kind of bubble that we have at the school, and that's exactly what we ask everyone to do. And it's kind of, for some students, it's a little bit like coming home in a way. Like they are surrounded by people who are like them, and they're encouraged in all of the things that they want to do that before they weren't really supported with. Yeah.
And how did the college recruit these women? How did the word get out? I mean, I believe you had some sites that you would visit.
Yeah, our admissions team did a lot of work. They went out to all regions of the country. They spoke at secondary schools. They spoke at town meetings, really trying to get the word out and go into the remotest parts of the country and offer that opportunity up for young women. So now it's a little easier because it's word of mouth, and family members are sending their sisters, and but at the beginning it was a lot of legwork. Yeah.
And how did they manage the financial part of it?
The students? So one of the great things about school too is after the beginning they offered this microloan program. So the students could pay a nominal fee during the year, and then once they graduated and they got a job, they could start paying back the loan. And one of the parts of our model was that within 6 months we guaranteed that you would be placed in a job. That was one of the attractions too for the students working together. So if we kept up that end of the bargain and they were employed within 6 months, then they could start paying back. So it was kind of a win-win situation there.
And what kind of community projects did they do?
Some really great ones. There was one project that I really liked, had to do with feminine hygiene products. And there have been studies coming out that young women in middle school were dropping out and failing because they weren't going to school while they were menstruating. So they're missing at least a week of classes every month.
Right.
There are a number of organizations that address that, and our students worked with an NGO that was actually using certain material that could be reused, so you could wash it and be reused. That way it was affordable for families, because it's really the cost that's prohibitive, even if you create a product that's made with local. They formed a women's cooperative. Now they're selling the product. There was another group that went into a community in the capital, and they went in with the assumption that there were a lot of students in primary school level who weren't going to school. Some of the assumptions were why the parents weren't paying attention, or kind of they made their own guesses as to that. And what they found out was that actually a lot of the families were categorized in the wrong socioeconomic level. So in Rwanda, you have these different levels for taxation and also government aid. So they were classified as level 2, so they weren't getting school fees paid for, uniforms, textbooks. And if you don't have the money, that's too expensive to send. So they went to the government organization that determines that. They came in and visited the community and actually reclassified a number of people as level 1. So they would pay for their children's. Yeah, that was really, really amazing. Nobody expected sort of that level of, and this was like in a 3-month. That's just an example, I think, of how those kinds of projects can really not just build in confidence, but to let you know the skills that you have at that moment, even though you think you may not have a lot to contribute, can really, lead to a huge impact.
And what about the debate team?
So we had a great debate team, and they took part in the inter-university debate competition in the capital. And it was the first all-female team that had ever taken part in that competition. And they were kind of made fun of during the competition. People had very low expectations for them. They're like, oh, they're not going to be able to perform.
Girls.
What are they? Yeah, they look nice. And then when they started debating, people, realized that it were serious competition. And they ended up winning the debate, which was amazing. Out of that came coordination between the debate organizer, our instructors, and ourselves to form this all-female debate within the country. Because, the instructor in the organization was saying, well, why is this so unusual that we have very few women in debate? We actually helped organize this countrywide debate. We had regional competitions. They were just all female collegiate teams. Yeah, and then we had the final at our school. So that was really, that's one of the things that I think I'm most proud of.
Very remarkable. If just an overview of the type of development the faculty benefited from in terms of your role.
Probably a shift from teacher-centered, lecture-oriented classroom to student-centered.
Okay.
Really making the shift and thinking about, student learning. What strategies am I using in the classroom to really reach every single student? I remember when I had worked in another country, one of the teachers had said to me after we'd done some training, like very, very seriously, she said, I didn't think it was my responsibility as the teacher to make the students learn. And it sounds funny, but a lot of the way teachers approach things or lecturers approach things is that I'm going to give you the information, happens here too, and it's your responsibility to learn it. I don't need to organize it according to your perceptual learning styles, or if you're second language learners, I don't need to address any of the pedagogy. I present it, and you need to, absorb what I've taught you. So really, that's a huge shift too, looking at it from the student's perspective.
Let's take a little shift ourselves and look back to the beginning and help trace where you got to that point. So you grew up in Wallingford with educator parents. So tell us a little bit about your high school experience and how you were influenced by, I believe you had a student exchange experience in New Zealand.
Yeah, yeah. That I would say was a big influence on my life.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Being involved with American Field Service, the club we had was great, very active. And so being exposed early on to people, from other countries and being involved in short-term exchanges really kind of opens up your
Mm-hmm.
world. Being able to go on a foreign exchange for a year when I was a junior.
In high school.
Yeah.
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 Wow.
Just really, and it's kind of what I was looking for. I was
Mm-hmm.
looking for something new and exciting, and I was always really interested in other cultures and the way how do other people look at things, other
Mm-hmm.
cultures, other places, differently from the way that I was kind of raised and brought up. Just that kind of wisdom of other cultures and education. And so from there, I loved traveling. I fell in love with it. Just wanted to go more and more
Do
places.
that always.
Yes.
How did you decide where to start your career as an educator?
College, I went into Peace Corps in
Okay.
Namibia for 2 years. That's something that I had always wanted to do. And then after that, when I came home, one of the reasons I originally went into education is because I think it's like a great equalizer.
Mm-hmm.
We have free education in the States, which is amazing. So it doesn't matter, what kind of socioeconomic background you're born into, you almost have the same opportunity to receive almost the same education
Mm-hmm.
as everybody else. As Jonathan Kozol says, there's educational apartheid in the country. In certain areas, there's not, the education is not equal. It's not
Mm-hmm.
as good as other places. And so I just always wanted to work in the inner city and kind of give opportunity to students who might normally have.
And you had some significant accomplishment there around, I believe, helping students think of themselves as going to college and the rate of students that did actually do that.
I was working in the bilingual department as an ESL teacher at that stage. And when I first got there, another new colleague and myself realized that none of our students from the program were going to college upon graduation. And, from our background, well, how is that possible?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that's the next thing that you do. There, we had a new principal, which was great. He was behind us and other colleagues. And we just rallied together, rehauled the whole curriculum, added a lot more reading and writing, and then changed got everyone on the same page, the counselors and everyone talking to students. What's your language? Not if you go to college, but when you go to college, you're going to do this, changing everyone's expectations. And of course, the students and their families. So we ended up with, I think it was within 3 to 4 years, we had 85% college acceptance rate for our students. And yeah, they were amazing.
And did you have confidence they would be able to find the resources they might need to finish? Because I know being accepted to college is one thing and finishing college is another, right?
Yeah, that was definitely a little piece that we needed to address afterwards. Luckily, they were very comfortable with us, so they would come back when they started. A lot of them stayed local with CUNY, like the local public university. So we did realize that there's another step there, because even though they're in New York City, still leaving your comfort zone of your neighborhood and then going someplace completely different does require some additional support. So we did put in some structure for that first semester that they were away in order to give them that support.
And then you went on to all kinds of parts of the world, right? Asia, Latin America, and Africa. Does that kind of cover it? And was some of that with the Peace Corps, or how did that fit in?
When I left New York, one of them was Fulbright as a teacher exchange program, which is interesting. That was with Hungary, so you kind of switch lives. Okay. Very interesting. So the Hungarian teacher came to my school and actually moved into my apartment, and I moved into her position in Hungary and worked with her colleagues. So that was a really great experience.
How did that work from a language standpoint?
I did learn Hungarian, which is a really, I wouldn't say I'm not fluent, but I was able to, get around and do all of my daily activities and travel. And I had friends who didn't speak English, conversation. So I would say maybe like intermediate level around there.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, it's a really interesting language. But the school was a bilingual school, so the daily routine was all in English. My classes were in English. My colleagues' English was amazing.
And it's a broad question, but impressions that you've gained that have informed your life going forward from being in these different countries.
One of the things I would say is just gaining a different perspective on the way that you look at things, or the way that I look at things, seeing things from different point of view. Also, culturally, every culture has their own educational system, like the way that they raise from early on, and their own wisdom. And I think there's a lot to be learned from the way that people approach these. There's not just one way or the right way, or this is the way that I know. Being able to be exposed to all of that, I think I've really learned a lot in that regard. And learning other languages, also, you really get a feel for the culture more, I think. Being able to speak Spanish, I just feel that I understand the culture a little bit more than if I didn't. And I've had the chance to work with amazing people with very limited resources who are still doing amazing things that inspire me every day.
And what were some differences you saw culturally as it impacted education, say, between Asia and Latin America?
My experience in Asia was with China. So there was a lot more government oversight of what was going on and involvement. So, for example, the English program, they made an effort to invite all of these people with master's degree. They wanted them in all the universities. Like, there was this huge push in order to change the academics of the students. So to see that on such a massive scale is quite impressive. Versus, say, another country where the government is overwhelmed by other issues, say in Guatemala with, the drug cartels and things like that, and is not really focused so much on these giant initiatives in education. And so that's left up more to individuals and organizations that are working within the country.
On a micro level, it makes me think of families a little bit. I mean, there's families that are overwhelmed with the basics of life, and education doesn't often bubble up consistently enough maybe to really help that student move to the next point because the family's consumed with more basic needs. Right?
Yeah.
As opposed to a family that maybe is in the middle and can have more of a balance, middle economically or whatever.
It's an advantage,
and take advantage of different things that are offered.
Yeah, people need support.
Absolutely.
When you're overwhelmed.
Okay. So welcome back to Wallingford, right? You've recently come back and now you're thinking about different things you might do. What are some of the options you're considering?
I mean, I love the principal job. That was the last position I had in education. I still love teacher training. So anything in those fields. I would love to be like a founding principal of a new school that aligned with kind of the methodology that I'm interested in, just to start with a new team and be able to build that from the ground up would be great. I'm also thinking about maybe consulting positions that maybe work overseas part-time in here, so then it wouldn't be a complete shift back to the U.S., but I'd still be able to travel a bit. I think that might be the best of both worlds.
You also put into the pot an idea of maybe moving more permanently to another country?
I'm still looking at positions abroad.
In the interim, you're going to try some different things with, I think you mentioned doing some teaching and some
adjunct work, which is kind of nice. It's good to go back into the classroom. I think, especially if you're in an administrator role, to not lose that perspective of what it's like for a teacher to be in the class with the student. A class last week, which was really fun.
What's the subject matter?
It's a basic English composition class, so freshman writing, academic writing. That's usually done the first semester of most universities.
And do you see yourself as focusing more on that college level, high school level, as opposed to elementary? We were talking about that a little bit before the show started, some of the different challenges and opportunities.
Yeah. Well, most of my work is secondary or college, post-secondary, so I feel most comfortable and most experienced in those roles. I could see doing a complete shift out of secondary to college level, especially in a teacher education program, because I've had so much experience in that area. Preparing future teachers, that's is something I also would love to do. So.
It's wide open. And thinking about that, what advice would you give to your younger selves?
Yeah, let's see. I think I would say to not be doubtful about moving into a leadership role or supervisory role, that you won't go to the dark side.
Right, those people
you don't
that
always
right.
have to, like push something from grassroots. You can still, be completely in touch with students and their needs, but you'll be able to affect things at a larger level. There'll be challenges for sure, but yeah, it's just to maybe push into that a little bit earlier. I think it's one of the things I might have been able to tell myself.
Is there anything else?
There are a lot of things.
Okay. Hey, well, let me say this. Anything else you'd like to share with the world that's watching?
I think just maybe also to find someone, a colleague, someone who's aligned with your vision, and you just need one other person,
Right.
like to kind of dig in, get everybody else involved, and to really affect change. So even if you're not in a supervisory role, there's so many huge impactful things that you can do in whatever position, and there are amazing people out there. You just need to find them.
Okay. And do you have a favorite quote, mantra, encouraging word for yourself?
Yeah, I think the latest one is it's attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt. It's much longer, but it's basically you must do the thing you think you cannot. That has really propelled me to do the things that not just you're afraid of something, you're like, okay, well, I'll try it, but it's like something that you really have convinced yourself, like, oh, I'm not experienced enough to do that. Oh, I tried that before and I wasn't so great at it, but really just saying, okay, I admit that I think that I'm not going to be good at that or I can't do it. I have to do that today.
Okay.
Or I have to go for that goal.
Take that first step, which is really what you were encouraging your students in your most recent post, right? And the teachers, I imagine, to shift maybe the way they're teaching and get out of their comfort zone, particularly those young women, in terms of seeing themselves in an entirely new light.
Yeah. So take your own advice.
Take your own advice. All right. Well, thank you. This has been great, and I totally appreciate having you come on the show and wish you the best of luck with your next steps. Thank you. Thank you for watching. I'm Georgian Lussier, the host of MidLIFE Matters TV, and I encourage you to tune in again to hear other fascinating stories of future guests. Thanks again.